To start your Chelsea buns, I've got 250 grams of flour and about half a teaspoon of salt in here, and just 15 grams of the butter. So just 15 grams of the butter out of the 40 grams that's going to be used. The other 25 I've got separate in a bowl because that's needed for the filling. And the first thing to be done is just rub that butter in with your fingertips, and you've only got a tiny bit of butter for the amount of flour that you've got, so it shouldn't take long for that to rub in. And the reason that you need that tiny little bit of fat in there is to help keep the Chelsea buns fresh. One of the properties of fat in baking is it helps to prevent things from going stale quite so quickly. And this is an enriched bread mix, as it's made using butter in the mix, not a lot, but there is some butter there, milk and egg. So if you think you've rubbed your fat into your flour, remember, shake your bowl, any large lumps of butter would come up to the top. So that's done. I'm just going to wash my hands. And now I'm ready to think about adding the liquid into this bowl. So I have 125 mils of milk in a measuring jug, which I've just warmed in the microwave. You can warm it in a saucepan if it's easier for you. And I can see there is steam coming off this, but if I put my finger in, it's not boiling hot. And into that, I'm just going to add my 1 egg. You don't want to get your milk too hot, otherwise when you put your egg in, it will start to cook the egg. But also, when you then add it to your Chelsea bun mix, if it's too hot, it can kill the yeast. So I've just made sure I've broken up the yolk there and mixed those two together. And the cold egg has brought the temperature of that down a little bit so that it's just warm. So into my bowl, having rubbed my fat in, I just need to put my 7 grams of fast-acting yeast and just mix that in. Then make a well in the centre, so just make a hole in the centre and pour in most of the egg and milk mixture and stir that up until you've got a nice soft dough. And to be perfectly honest, if your bread dough is a little bit wet, it is better to have it too wet than too dry. If it's too dry, it's going to be quite difficult to roll it out and for the gluten to develop. I haven't put all of my egg and milk in, still got a little bit left, but there is enough in there to make me a nice soft dough. And as I said, I'd rather have a soft dough than one which is too dry. So I'm just going to keep mixing this until I've got all the flour from around the outside of the bowl, or as much of the flour from around the outside of the bowl as I can. And then your bowl can go out of your way into your sink. Little bit of flour on the worktop, put your dough down, and you can see at the moment my dough is very uneven on the surface. So this has to be kneaded for 5 to 10 minutes. Don't go over the top if you've got a wet dough with the amount of flour that you put on the worktop, because as you can see, as you knead it, it absorbs the dough. And if you've got really wet dough and lots of it stuck to your fingers, that's not going to help. In a minute I'm going to wash my hands again before I continue to knead this. But you're kneading. You fold the dough in half, push it away from you, turn it round, and you repeat that. And the faster you can do that, doesn't matter if you use one hand or two, the better it is. And you can see my dough has absorbed the flour that was on the worktop but because I'm keeping it moving quite quickly, I don't need to add any more. I've got to continue to knead this dough until the gluten has developed and I've got a nice smooth dough. So if I hold that up, hopefully you can see the surface of this dough at the moment is uneven and pitted. And I've got to continue to knead this until this is really nice and smooth. So don't turn your dough over, just keep kneading in half, turn it round, and don't put too much flour down on your worktop because it will all be absorbed by the bread. So 5 to 10 minutes of kneading until you've got a nice smooth dough. Once you've kneaded this dough for about 5 minutes, you should find that the top is much smoother, and that is when you can then roll your dough out. And when you roll it out this time, put some more flour down because you don't want it to stick to the worktop or to your rolling pin. And ideally, we want to roll this out to a square. And if you have kneaded it enough, what you should find is as you're trying to roll it out, you roll it out a bit and it shrinks back again, and that's perfect. You can pull the corners because we do really want this to be a square, so pull the corners if you need to, and you need to roll this to about 25 centimetres square. And I would say that was roughly the long edge of your recipe card square, because your recipe card is roughly the size of a piece of A4 paper, roughly the size of my board. If I put my board down, I want a square about that length of my board. So I'm going to keep rolling. Don't worry about the fact that this looks quite thin, or as I say, about the fact that it keeps shrinking. Doesn't matter. We just want to try and get it to a square. Okay, I've rolled my dough out. You can see it's roughly, it doesn't have to be perfect, roughly the size of an A4 piece of paper square. And now I need to prepare the filling. So I have 50 grams or 25 grams. I've got 25 grams of demerara sugar. Didn't think that looked like 50. And I'm going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon to my sugar. Because I'm at home, I don't have any mixed fruit at the moment, so I'm actually going to make my Chelsea buns using a chocolate filling. If you want to make yours using a chocolate filling at school, that's entirely up to you, but you will need to bring your chocolate from home. So I've got 50 grams of demerara sugar, which has a teaspoon of cinnamon, or you can use a teaspoon of mixed spice. I've got 100 grams of chocolate chips, and you could use 100 grams of dried fruit. And I have a round tin prepared with a bit of parchment in the bottom to stop it from sticking. I've melted the remaining 25 grams of margarine, and you just pour that over the top of your pastry, and then either use your fingers or a pastry brush and just spread that around, but I find it's easier to use my fingers. Try not to get it too close to the edges. So that's on there. Then I'm going to sprinkle over the sugar and the spice, and that will, as you can see, that's starting to melt inside there already. So again, close to but not quite up to the edges. Use it all because that will help give flavour. And then your fruit, or in my case, your chocolate chips. So there we go. Oh, a couple left in the bowl, and any that escape, just put them back in. Just spread them out fairly evenly. And then comes the fun bit. You need to roll this up. So start with the side that's closest to you and lift this and tuck it in on itself. We want a nice, even roll. If you want to make it really tight, you can pull it and stretch it a bit as you are rolling it, just to make sure that you get a really good swirl in the middle of this. And when you are done, escaping chocolate, just tuck back in all the escaping chocolate and escaping fruit. 3 more there. Make sure that the join is underneath and at the bottom. And then the last thing that you need to do is get a knife, use the back of the knife and divide this up. And I normally divide in half, divide into quarters, and then decide how big I want my Chelsea buns to be, because my tin is a little bit deeper than yours. I think if I was at school I'd do 8. So actually I'm just going to do 8. So that was nice and easy. In half, into quarters, each quarter in half, and then you can cut them. And because you've marked it, you can see where the cuts are going to go. And with any luck, you can see the swirl in the middle of these. So you want that swirl, and they go into your tin swirl side showing. Do not put them so that all you can see is your bread dough. They need to go into your tin swirl side up. And this tin is a little bit big for this amount of mixture. Normally they would be touching, and when they'd risen then they would be a little bit closer together, but because this tin is a little bit big, I can't pull them apart. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to move them slightly closer to each other, and they are just going to rise in part of the tin. So I'm not leaving loads of gap between them, but I want them to rise together a little bit more. At school you'll have a smaller tin. The only other thing that I would say is, if you can see chocolate chips sticking out the top of a particular swirl, or if there's dried fruit right on the top, try tucking it in, because this is going to go into a very, very hot oven, and any chocolate chips or fruit right on the very top will burn. So I'm just going to tuck those in, leave those to rise for a couple of minutes, and then put those in a hot oven. So they're going in an oven on gas mark 7, 220 degrees for just about 20 minutes. But as I have time, what I want looking for with the rise is when I touch them that I can't see a fingerprint. So I'm just going to give them a few minutes while I clean up, and then I'll pop them in the oven and cook them for 20 minutes. Okay, the Chelsea buns are cooked. They've been in the oven for just under 15 minutes. They had risen just slightly so that they were joining, but you can see where the tin is a little bit big, this one on the side has opened up and the chocolate's got a bit dark there. So just leave them to cool down in the tin for a little while, and then you can pull them apart.